creatives, my name is Hannah Spangler and welcome to the first ever Spangler Scribbles tutorial. This is something new for me, but I figured since so many people have asked me how I draw, I thought I'd start explaining with some of the basics, so might as well get started. Today I want to talk about the importance of emphasis, and emphasis is basically the composition inside of a design that helps you draw your eye to a focal point. And every composition has a focal point. It's a section of an image your eye is immediately drawn to. And it can be done by either isolation, placement, pattern, or contrast. And I have some examples here. Contrast is one of the most common types of emphasis. As you can see here, this is a contrast by value, which means that everything else has this sort of darker shade or anything involving contrast in value. So value might mean the brightness of everything in the composition. So everything might be either dark and then something in there has sort of a lighter touch to it, like this white square here, because you're immediately drawn to something that is different inside the composition. And then there's also shape. It can be the same value, but there's something about the shape that makes you draw your eye to it. So everything else, like think of a building landscape or something like a cityscape. And there's a bunch of, square buildings, very angular, and then you see maybe a hot air balloon, that's something different. It's round instead of the square type spaces. And then there's also shape and size. It can be the same shape, but the size is different, which is something that can be easily done. And then there's also, you can combine everything. The more combination you add to a focal point, the more your eye is being drawn to it. It's more visually interesting. So contrast is one of the most commonly used in some of the pieces that I've done and some of them that I've seen. And then we can go towards isolation. And isolation is where the focal point is a subject that is separated from another area of the image. So an isolation can often mean, sadness or exclusion or rejection, but it can also give some sort of relaxation and peacefulness depending on how you create the composition. So there's an example along with this one right here, where the circle just wants to be independent from the other circles in that little triangle, It's like, I will be my own circle. Don't tell me who I am. I know who I am. Anyway, so there's another emphasis by placement, and placement is where the composition plays a part in directing your eye to the focus of the piece. So as you can think, Starry Night. Starry Night is one of those paintings where it has like those swirls at the top and then it kind of leads you to where that black thing is. It's a really interesting piece that can mean like there probably is no specific focal point, but that's just an example that either the motion of the objects in the piece draw your eye to something inside the composition, like these two examples here, where you can utilize everything that you have in there that'll lead you to a certain point in the composition that you want people to focus on. So that's another really common thing that I've seen in a lot of paintings and stuff. So, and I'll give you a couple examples later. And then there is another called pattern or lack of emphasis. And the focal point is nowhere to be found, obviously. There's no detectable focal point. Everything is equally busy throughout the image. And I haven't seen a lot of paintings like this or drawings or anything because a lot of us artists like to have our audience's attention on something. So you won't see a lot of this in paintings, but I'll give you an example here in just a second. So here I have some examples. This is a painting by Noah Bradley, and this is a really great example of emphasis by placement and contrast in value. Noah Bradley is an amazing artist and he creates beautiful landscapes and concepts. I'll probably put an annotation in the piece so you can go to the original so you can like it, or better yet, support the artist. Always support the artist. They love that. If not, I'll just put the link in the piece in the description below. This is one of the pieces where he uses emphasis by placement and contrast in value. As you can see, he uses the directional force of the clouds here. Let me get this right here. Oh goodness. He does a really good job in utilizing these emphases. So as you can see here, he uses the clouds to direct your eye to the focal point, which is the castle right there. And he also uses the contour of the mountains to draw your eye as well. So the focal point is obviously this white castle that is contrasted by value, which means that the darkness of the mountains here is very much different than the brightness of the castle that is right there. So that's one of the great examples of how placement is utilized in the piece. And also, you might notice that there's also these people down here, and maybe your eye was drawn to that first. I mean, it all depends on who is looking at the piece, and there's a reason why. So there's both focal points here, but you can start looking at a focal point over here, and it'll also draw your eye. Other pieces in the composition can draw your eye to another focal point in the piece. It doesn't have to have one, you know? I mean, an interesting composition can draw your eye all throughout the piece. It doesn't have to be one particular place. Because, I mean, an artist worked really hard on this piece. You don't want to just look at one specific area. An artist wants you to really observe what he or she has created. So, it can also, these little guys here can also be emphasized by contrast and size. As you can see, the brightness of everything in this particular area right here is contrasted by how dark the silhouettes are in this particular piece. So that's a really great example of contrast by placement, or I mean, emphasis by placement and contrast by value. And here's a really great example of emphasis by contrast in color and size. And this is a piece by Pascal Campion. Pascal is one of my all-time favorite artists. He does a lot of couple pieces and family-oriented painting as well. He does a great job showing emotion in his daily drawings. It's unbelievable. Anyway, here is a piece that the focal point is the couple in the park bench. I would say it is generally emphasized by the size and the color, because everything else is dark compared to them. They have like these white pants and really bright colored shirts. And there's really nothing in this composition that draws your eye to the couple, so placement really isn't the emphasis. There's a really strong horizontal line here, like implied by the benches, and then the lines of the trees here. Another way to determine if you are contrasting enough is if you work in grayscale, or if you switch it to grayscale really quick. As you can see, another contrasting piece is right here where the lamps are, but it's so far out near the border that your eye doesn't really want to look there. It really needs to look here near the center of the piece. So as you can see, compared to everything else around it, the white pants really stand out. So that's what your eye is drawn to. Even though there is this sense of isolation, they're both together. So it really makes it all lovey-dovey romantic type stuff, and it's a really great composition to look at. Here's another piece by Campion that emphasizes isolation, but also you could say it's emphasis by placement just a little bit. As you can see from the light source here, it kind of draws your eye down to where the couple is in this corner. And even the railings over here and the motion of the archway kind of moves it over there. But just looking near the top of the piece right here, there's this big vastness that you see. And it gives it this sense of isolation because how big it really is. But here's what's cool about Pascal Campion and the emphasis by isolation. You don't necessarily feel sadness. I mean, that's how cool it is. There's a sense of peacefulness and relaxation, almost heartfelt in a romantic way. So it's Pascal Campion is just an amazing artist, and he does a really great job with his compositions. So you should follow up with him. You know, look at all of his daily sketches. He draws daily. I mean, that's how cool he is. Anyway, so here is the next piece, and this is the emphasis by no focal point. So there's a lack of emphasis. So there's all of these these faces here that you don't necessarily have your eye being drawn to a particular one unless you're a really interesting person and you have a focal point in mind. But this looks like really, familiar, like with all the photo thing, what is it, like iPhoto that you can do. I forget what the term is, but this is by Andy Warhol, and it's a common piece that we see every now and then. There's no focal point at all, so that's just a really simple way to look at it. And then here is a combination of all the emphasis techniques. And it's another Pascal piece. Can you tell I love this artist? So he has a lot of pieces like these where the composition is full of things to look at. A good composition is visually interesting and draws your eye to look all throughout the piece. And Campion calls this Top Chef Junior Monday practice. It's so adorable how he draws from his personal experience with his family and creates these heartwarming pieces. It's just an amazing artist in general. This is one of those paintings where the focal point is dependent on who sees it. It's like, what do you see first? Do you see the girls busily working at the island, or do you see the boys kind of just being goofballs and eating off to the side, or do you see this dog running away with sausages? It's so busy that it doesn't really matter what you look at. That's the point. He wants you to look all throughout. So the motion of how the food is flying gives you this radial rhythm to it. So it starts out here and it just works your way in there. So you might even say the octopus is the focal point if you want. It doesn't matter, because it's such an amazingly busy piece and it's so visually vibrant that it's one of the greatest techniques you can use in a piece if you want your viewer to see everything that you created. And here are some of my examples from a school project I did the first semester of college. I did the exact same, I learned about the exact same thing that I'm teaching right now, with like isolation and contrast, placement and no focal point, all stuff like that. And it's really important to work with thumbnails beforehand. It's very important to design ahead of time, to plan. Design is a very important part of the creative process. It's very rare when an artist just grabs a canvas and starts painting without an idea of what he wants to create. Creating thumbnails like these help you narrow down your vision and find what works for you before you spend hours and hours on a painting that doesn't work for you. So there's, obviously there's only one here and one there, and it's because I found what I was looking for very early on. But when it comes to contrast, this was the first idea I had, was having like a little bird, like a white bird in a dark shadow. But it just didn't seem very interesting enough, so I ended up with this one down here. And then I didn't even end up with this one. It was something very different. And I'll give you an example right here where the original is. So this is what I came up with. Emphasis by placement, and then isolation and contrast and no focal point. So it's a really interesting practice to stretch your creative abilities to do stuff like that. So here's another example of one of the pieces I just recently did, and it really helped me push the emphasis, So what I did was I planned to have the motion of the cliffs here draw your eye to the focal point, which is right here. So what I did was utilize the implied line of the motion through this to draw your eye right there. And then the arc of both of these, as you can see by the edge of this, it draws your eye to where the focal point is here. And even the small little branches like this kind of draw your eye to where the focal point is, and the vines drawing down to where it is right there. So placement is one of the common ones that I use all the time. So that's basically it, and there you have it. Now you've learned about the different types of emphasis. There's contrast, placement, isolation, and pattern. I hope this helps you in your design process and pushes your creative limits. Combine different types of emphasis and see how it translates into your piece. And always remember this, there is only one you. Be the masterpiece you were created to be. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time! Hey guys, thanks again so much for watching my first Spangler Scribbles tutorial. Again, it was my first one, so I'm not really familiar on how to do some of this stuff, so I probably sounded like I was rambling and didn't know what I was talking about, which that could be true. But anyway, if you really did like it, please leave a like below, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment as well. I might be able to answer them in the next video if you guys really are interested. And check the annotations to see what other things that I've done. Most of them are time-lapse speed paints if you're interested on how I created some of the pieces that I might show in the future. So again, thank you so much. And again, remember, there's only one you. Be the masterpiece you were created to be. See ya!